pleasure. Yeah.
So, in reading about you, I saw that you're a teacher.
Yep, absolutely.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your background and also now your new transition into college?
Sure, yeah. So I guess originally I'm from Toronto. I went to high school in Toronto, but I came to Montreal in 1993 to go to Concordia and fell in love with the city, and I never left after that. And yeah, I did my BA at Concordia and then actually spent a couple years in the student union. So I was elected the president of the Concordia Student Union, did 2 terms there, and I think had a really successful run. We did a lot of things there. We had a student strike that actually stopped a fee increase that's to this day saving the students of Concordia millions of dollars a year. We also were sort of the student, while I was president, we provided the critical support for the People's Potato Collective to get started. So they offer a free vegan lunch service, and that's still running to this day. And that was sort of, I mean, it was the People's Potato Collective were really the ones that got it off the ground, but we helped them run a referendum and gave them space to run it at the beginning, and then did a lot of the work kind of pressuring the university to give us more space to run it. So, and after that, I did a graduate diploma in community economic development at Concordia. And in the middle of that program, so I was thinking about working in the community sector at that time. But right while I was in that program, Jean Charest got elected and slashed all the funding to the community groups, which then got me thinking about teaching. And actually, before I did my training at McGill, I did 2 internships with an NGO based here in town called Alternatives. And they actually sent me to Senegal twice, where I did 2 internships there of about 4 months, helping some of their partner organizations build websites, and also working with a group of Senegalese youth, basically organizing a popular education tour, raising awareness about the effects of both globalization and climate change. So that was actually my first teaching experience was in Senegal. Yep. And yep, then I came back, I did my B.Ed, and I've been teaching at Westmount High ever since. And I guess as a teacher, I haven't sort of limited my voice to the classroom. I've also been someone who's been very outspoken in the media about sort of the systemic underfunding of public education in Quebec. And I guess it was a couple years ago that I started speaking out about the problems with the history curriculum, at which point I was invited to chair a committee that's called the Committee for the Enhancement of the History Curriculum in Quebec. And so we were speaking out about the fact that the latest reform to the history curriculum in Quebec has basically eliminated the positive contributions to Quebec society by minority groups, and in addition has cast Anglophones in the role of sort of comic book villain, and they've also utterly failed to address the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So for several years now, I've been speaking out about that. I've been writing in the Gazette. I actually wrote a piece in 2018, for Black History Month, focusing specifically on just the major omissions in the Quebec textbook with respect to Black history. Like it's shameful. In fact, there are, I think, 2 Black people mentioned in the entire textbook. And one of the references is to Rufus Rockhead's Jazz Club in Little Burgundy. And, so the only thing you kind of learn about Rufus Rockhead was an association with jazz music. They don't say anything about the history of the Little Burgundy community, how it started, and the discrimination that people faced there, and the fact that that community began because Black people weren't allowed to live in other parts of the city. So it's a history that whitewashes Quebec's history of racism, of anti-Semitism, and of the terrible ways we've treated Indigenous people. And I definitely feel very strongly that if we are ever to move beyond the problems that we have in Quebec society, and we're continuing to hear about them in the news with respect to, the way that the police are behaving. If we're ever to move beyond these issues, we have to, that has to begin with teaching children the truth about what has happened in our history. So that's been one of the things that I've been very outspoken about. And I guess last spring I was invited by the Riding Association president for the Green Party in NDG Westmount to run for the Green Party. And I was immediately very intrigued by that possibility. And part of the reason is related to my job as a teacher. So I've been, for the past 10 years, teaching a course called The Contemporary World in Secondary 5. And I've been teaching a unit on the science and politics of the climate emergency. And every year I have to teach that unit, the science gets more terrifying. And I've, in recent years, started to lose sleep. Because how do you, tell young people the truth about the dangers that they will face in this world without destroying their hope, without making them sort of check out and fall into despair. And I guess, I wrestle with that because I suffer from climate anxiety myself. I mean, it's impossible to look at that science and not feel anxious about the future. I mean, they are literally talking about, changes that could spell the collapse of human civilization. Like, it's just terrifying to look at. And so, I had been feeling for some time that I needed to do more than just teach about the climate emergency. I've been told by many people that I have, some skills as a communicator, and that I should put those skills to work, speaking out and trying to raise awareness about this situation, because if we don't take action and take action very quickly, we are going to be leaving our children just a terrible legacy of risk and potential catastrophe.
Without trying to sound like too catastrophic or profitable, how long would you estimate that going at with the rate at which we're going? How long would you estimate that we have in terms of years?
Well, it's really not my estimates. It's the estimates of the climate scientists, and specifically we're talking about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the United Nations that looks at all of the various studies done on the climate, and then tries to build its future.
It could be argued that, with the current policies that there's, trying to, in reducing carbon emissions, like, having like a carbon tax, and if you have a company that's emitting, there's like a kind of like a cap put on it, and, you pay and in turn plant trees, it could be argued that that's one measure to take, and that's something that's going on. So that could be argued that that's a way of, trying to repair the damage.
Absolutely, and actually we support a carbon tax as well, and actually a much more robust carbon tax than the ones that the Liberals are proposing.
Which would be what?
So the idea for us, we call it a fee and dividend carbon tax that will put the tax on the source of the output. So basically when the oil's coming out of the ground, that's where we hit it with the tax. And then all of the money that's raised through that tax isn't used by the government. So it's revenue neutral, okay, for the government. What we do with all of that is redistribute it to Canadians. And so what that means is, if you're a Canadian that is making responsible decisions, like maybe choosing to take public transit rather than drive your car, or take your bike, or do other things to make your house more energy efficient, you're going to be paying less in carbon tax than you're getting back in the rebate from the government. Like our carbon tax will have a major effect of actually redistributing wealth, because it's the wealthiest people that are using the most carbon, and the money being redistributed will come back to everyone. So it serves multiple goals. It changes the incentives in our economy to incentivize good decisions, not bad decisions, but it also will move us towards being a more equal country. And that's also, I think, an incredibly important goal, because we've been seeing, for the last several decades, a trend in Canada that the rich have been getting richer, the poor have been getting poorer, and the middle class has been getting squeezed. And if we don't take action to put the brakes on that, we're soon going to find ourselves in a social structure that looks not unlike that of like medieval Europe, where you've got a tiny elite holding all the wealth and power, and the rest of us toiling away. So,
being, with your background as a teacher, you kind of have your hand on the pulse. How would you describe the opinions of young people when it comes to the environment?
Well, they're terrified. Like there's no other way to put it. And this is it. Like seeing that from them is really what has motivated me to like give up my summer, give up a month of my pay, and spend every moment I have right now out there knocking. Distributed will come back to everyone. So it serves multiple goals. It changes the incentives in our economy to incentivize good decisions, not bad decisions. But it also will move us towards being a more equal country. And that's also, I think, an incredibly important goal because we've been seeing, for the last several decades, a trend in Canada that the rich have been getting richer, the poor have been getting poorer, and the middle class has been getting squeezed. And if we don't take action to put the brakes on that, we're soon going to find ourselves in a social structure that looks not unlike that of like medieval Europe, where you've got a tiny elite holding all the wealth and power, and the rest of us toiling away. So,
being, with your background as a teacher, you kind of have your hand on the pulse. How would you describe the opinions of young people when it comes to the environment?
Well, they're terrified. Like there's no other way to put it. And this is it. Like seeing that from them is really what has motivated me to like give up my summer, give up a month of my pay, and spend every moment I have right now out there knocking on doors and doing interviews and doing things like this to get the word out. Last year I had a 16-year-old girl put up her hand in class and say that she didn't want to have children because she didn't think the world would be safe. I mean, this is a hard thing to deal with. Especially if you care about young people, you cannot not be affected by that kind of thing. And I wish that members of the Liberal Party could come and witness that sort of thing and then explain to them how they can possibly continue building pipelines and continue offering billions in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. To me, it is just the height of immorality. I mean, this is the biggest threat that humanity has ever faced, and our political leaders are acting as if it's just any other political issue that they can just talk about.
And so the numbers show us that the largest voter demographic is between 18 to about 38 years.
Mm-hmm.
So within the NDG area, why should it matter to that demographic? Why should it matter? Why should the Green Party's policies matter to that demographic for those who don't know?
Well, I'll first just mention the climate emergency because these young people are going to live the consequences. We are looking at so many, we're already seeing the consequences. I mean, the floods that we saw on the West Island, even, we had in this riding a couple of years ago, this weird microburst in Girard Park that took down some of the most beloved trees in that park. That was a very odd weather event, and a lot of people were noting that. The past, not this summer, but the 2 summers before, we saw like over 1 million hectares of forests in Western Canada burn. So, we're already seeing the consequences, but those consequences are just going to be escalating. And sadly, they're going to be escalating worse for people in the global south. So, the consequences of climate change are going to be worse in the poorer countries, on island nations, where we're looking at rising sea levels, and also the increased rates of hurricanes. I mean, the scientists who study hurricanes are now talking about the fact that we perhaps need another category of hurricane. because the wind speeds that we've been seeing in some of these recent ones are so much higher than a typical Category 5 hurricane that they're thinking we need to start talking about Category 6 hurricanes. And so, this is going to mean a refugee crisis on a scale that the world has never seen before if we don't take action, right? And so young people are facing this world of consequences. We've been up until now living in a world of denialism, and now we're in the era of consequences, and that will fall on young people. But I also have to say, we have a number of things, like one of the big challenges for the Green Party is to get the message out that we are about much more than the environment. We're also a party of social justice, and so we want to move Canada in a direction of being more equal, and we're proposing a number of things that are really aimed at giving young people a boost. So first of all, we want to eliminate tuition for post-secondary education and cancel the debt loads, the federal debts that students are carrying. We believe that education should not be a debt sentence, and that starting your career with a debt of $30,000 or $40,000 hanging around your neck is unacceptable, and we should be doing more to help young people. And another thing is investments in co-op and social housing. So all across Canada, the cost of housing are going through the roof. And it's partly because the federal government years ago retreated from investments in social housing. And so we want to change that and actually make investments that will catch up some of the lost ground and ensure that people can have a roof over their head that they can afford and that doesn't cause them to live in extreme poverty. And in addition to that, we have a plan for free dental care for low-income families, and as well something called a guaranteed livable income. This is something coming from the government that will not just reduce poverty, but eliminate it. So whether you're a senior citizen that's living on a fixed income, and poverty is a problem. Poverty is a problem that disproportionately affects senior citizens, but also their caregivers, because very often, and I was in this position at one point, having to take a little bit of time off to care for an aging parent, causes people to fall into poverty. And so, the guaranteed livable income would lift anybody who's living in poverty, whether it be on a fixed income or what we call the working poor. People who are working full-time jobs but are still not managing to be able to keep up with their basic expenses. And so yeah, the guaranteed livable income would lift all of those people out of poverty. And I think this is just an incredibly important goal for Canada. We are a wealthy country, and it's unacceptable that we have the rates of poverty in our society that we do.
It sounds good on paper,
Yep.
but how is that going to be achieved? Because if the Green Party comes in and then we see the removal of all this like fossilized industry
Yep.
and all that, so that's again taking away jobs, a
Yes.
large number of jobs.
Yep.
So that's unemployment going up.
Yep.
And then the Green Party intends to start creating green technology and sustainable things. But that's again something being built from the foundation up. That doesn't guarantee that those who've lost their jobs have their jobs.
Well, and that's actually, this is a really important point you're raising, and it's a point that Elizabeth May, about a month ago, she held a press conference that sort of addressed this directly. And she made it clear that our plan to transition off of fossil fuels is a plan that leaves no one behind. And what she means by that is that before we start shutting down the oil sands, we need to target those areas of the country where there are likely to be job losses with the investments in green technologies, in renewable energies, and even the training programs to train people to, for example, be working to retrofit buildings to become more energy efficient. So the reality is, and there's sort of a teachable lesson here from France. So Emmanuel Macron tried bringing in a carbon tax, and he did it in a way that hurt working class people. And he also did it in a way that was very hypocritical because he was putting this carbon tax on working class people while actually giving tax cuts to the rich. And so we saw this massive social movement, the Gilets jaunes movement, rise up, and it really, it like paralyzed France for a number of weeks there. And that shows what happens if you don't, take care of people while you're trying to address the climate emergency. So we believe strongly that addressing this climate emergency has to be done in a way that ensures that people are being taken care of. Because if not, there will be a backlash. And that backlash could go in some very ugly directions. And we don't want to see that happen in Canada. But also we want, we're not against the workers in Alberta in any way. We want to make sure that they and their families are taken care of, and that there are good quality jobs for them. But the other thing is, we also believe that the jobs will be there. We actually are looking at, there's such need, for skilled labor in terms of transitioning our economy off of fossil fuels, that we're going to be moving towards a situation of full employment. I mean, just to retrofit all of Canada's buildings alone for energy conservation, they're talking about that creating about 4 million jobs. So, this is an enormous amount of employment opportunities, and as Elizabeth May has said, we're going to need all hands on deck. And that's part of the reason, actually, we want to eliminate tuition for post-secondary education, to get people trained with the skills that they're going to need to be useful in helping us transition our economy.
Okay. And so now coming down to NDG,
Yeah.
What is your vision for the NDG Westmount area? How do we, you're elected October,
Yeah.
November,
Yeah.
what do we start seeing?
Well, I think what you're going to be seeing from me is a strong voice supporting some of the amazing community organizations that exist here. So I have to say, of all of the events I've attended as a candidate thus far, my favorite one that I attended was the one held by the NDG Food Bank. Because what they did was they set up several tables. There was 4 candidates that showed up, so they had 4 tables. Each table had users of the NDG Food Bank there, and each table sort of had a theme. And so we would sort of rotate from table to table, hearing from the users of the food bank about their concerns related to that theme, and then responding to their questions. And to me, this was such a powerful event, because it was an opportunity for political candidates to hear directly from low-income families, and that's something that doesn't happen enough, frankly. And the sorts of things that we were hearing, I think, were incredibly important things for politicians to hear, because we were hearing about the real struggles that people were facing, even around putting food on the table, right? And so, we see that this riding is a riding with some very extreme inequality. We have some very, very wealthy people living in this riding, but we also have some people who are really, really struggling. And so I want to be sort of an ally and a voice supporting the organizations like the NDG Food Bank and many others that are, supporting people in need in this community. And I also want to be supporting some of the amazing local environmental groups. So over the summer, I had a chance to go out with a group called Sauvons la Falaise. That's just a citizens group that's engaged in trying to protect the green space that's along the Falaise Saint-Jacques as a critical place to kind of protect biodiversity in the city. And this is a really important initiative, because biodiversity is the other crisis we are facing. They're describing the period that we're living in as the 6th mass extinction, and talking about the fact that we could see up to a million species extinctions by the end of the century. So, these sorts of local initiatives to protect the little bits of green space that we have in cities and ensure that they're there for birds to eat and to have some wild animals, living in the city. It goes a long way in preserving biodiversity in Montreal. So, I guess I want to be a voice, for the grassroots, be they community organizations helping those in need, or environmental organizations that are getting citizens together to try to protect biodiversity. And I guess another thing that I'm really excited about with the Green Party is that we have a major commitment to invest in cities. So, there is a lot of frustration about municipal government, and I've encountered that at the doors. And part of that is that, part of the reason for that, and I don't think it has to do with the political leadership. I think, people are pretty happy with what Project Montreal's been doing. However, there's a problem that cities don't have the fiscal capacity to provide for all of the growing needs of urban dwellers. And so, all of the construction that we see everywhere, for example, part of the reason we see that is because cities have been neglecting investments in infrastructure for decades, and now it's all catching up with us, right? So we want to address that situation as the Green Party by actually investing in cities, providing federal support for investments in infrastructure, investments in social housing, investments in water infrastructure, and dealing with waste and things like that. And investments in public transit. We want to see that pink line happen and that sort of thing. So by supporting cities, we really feel that we can go a long way in improving the life of citizens in this riding. So,
should we be scared as a newspaper that if we apply for funding because we print papers, we wouldn't, we're not environmentally friendly?
Oh no, not at all. Look, the print media is essential. There's still a reality that not everybody has access to reading things online. And as well, many people prefer to print media. And the other thing I would say is that, look, our plan is not about, pointing fingers at people for individual consumption choices, right? Because you know what, that approach was tried throughout the 80s and 90s, shaming someone because they happened to use didn't bring their reusable cup to get their coffee or something like that. We tried that through the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s, and it didn't work. It didn't get us any closer to addressing the climate problem. So what we feel is that we need to change the incentives in our economy by making things that pollute more expensive, and then making things that are good for us less expensive. And because even if not all of us, care about the climate emergency, and it's a reality, not all of us do. All of us do care about the money in our pockets. And if we see that changing our consumption patterns will actually save us money, then we're going to see behavior changing on a mass level. And that's more what we're about as the Green Party, is sort of incentivizing mass changes rather than pointing fingers at individuals or, a community newspaper, Yeah.
Okay, so finally, paint a picture of NDG after Robert Greene is
Okay, so is it after just me making it to Parliament, or
Yes,
the Green Party coming to power? Because those could be two different things.
Well, you can paint the picture of the NDG
that I'd like to see happen. Okay.
And finally you can finish with
yes. Okay. Perfect. So if we really had the power to do what we want, first of all, we'd be seeing major improvements in people's health. Why? Because first of all, we plan major investments in the healthcare system to undo the effects of decades of austerity that have been imposed on our healthcare system by liberal and conservative governments alike, but also because there's going to be less toxins in the air that people breathe. And respiratory illnesses kill about 250,000 Canadians every year. There's going to be less chemicals in the food that we eat. We want to transition our agricultural production away from chemical-intensive production that's a sort of industrial and towards more organic methods that are better for family or better for farmers, better for consumers, and taste better as well. It's better for our health. Also, out of our water as well. So we want to make major investments in the quality of water. And this is something that we need to do very soon because climate change has a lot of potential to harm our aging water infrastructure. Hearing about lead in the water of schools around Montreal, which again, is a product of lack of investment in infrastructure. So other things, we'd be seeing a lot more public transit that's very comfortable to ride and is not all packed like sardines all the time. So a lot more people choosing to take public transit. So we'd be then seeing a lot less congestion on our streets. We'd be seeing a lot of the vehicles on our streets slowly becoming electric vehicles. We'd be hearing about people traveling to visit their relatives in other parts of Quebec or Ontario, not by car, but by very affordable passenger rail. That's going to be very efficient under the Green Party. We'd be hearing about our seniors having a greatly improved quality of life because they've been lifted out of poverty, because their pension contributions have been increased, and because their caregivers will now have the support that they need to take care of them without falling into desperate poverty. And I guess lastly, we'd see the problem of poverty be going away in NDG and in the riding NDG Westmount. And what that will mean is a happier, healthier society with people that are feeling good about the place that they live and have opportunities and are able to take care of their children the way that they want to take care of them. So we really feel that it will be a bright future for us. And as well, just one other thing, and this is just a little side issue, we won't be reading anymore about our government shipping massive shipments of arms to countries like Saudi Arabia that are in the middle of committing genocide and have been dropping bombs on school buses full of children. We won't be hearing about Canada considering to follow the Americans into their next insane war. We will be hearing about a Canada that is a voice for peace in this world, a voice for international aid for developing countries, and a voice for international solidarity. So in that sense, and calling to reform some of the international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, whose policies have been imposing, poverty and environmental degradation on developing countries. So, I think in that sense, we'd be seeing a Canada that is both happier domestically and part of a world that is becoming more peaceful and hopefully more happy as well. How's that for a utopian vision? Like that?